not waste any more time. Esteemed colleagues, it is a pleasure to welcome you to the first session of the Division for Research Development's Research Integrity and Ethics session for 2024. The first semester has officially begun, so we are thankful that you've taken time out of your hectic schedules to join us to discuss instances of research fraud, the publishing of fake papers, and the rise of retractions that are plaguing the scientific community. You would have seen the webinar rules on screen while you're waiting for us to start. The session is being recorded, and just to remind you, all the slides and the recording will be shared with attendees after the session. So please keep an eye out for that. Also, please keep your mics and cameras off for the duration of the session. You can feel free to post questions or comments in the chat. Prof. Lex Bouter has been gracious enough to allow me to interrupt him when there's hands raised for questions, so please use the raise hand function freely. So now allow me the honor to introduce our speaker, Prof. Lex Bouter. You have all seen his impressive bio, but please allow me to highlight a few before we start. So Prof. Bouter is Professor Emeritus of Methodology and Integrity at Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam and the Amsterdam University Medical Centers. He is the chair of the Netherlands Organization for Health Research and Development's Committee for Health Research on Disasters for COVID-19, that's since 2021, and he's the chair of the steering committee of the directing body of Open Science, that's Open Science Netherlands, of the Dutch Research Council since 2023. Prof. Lex is a member of the Council for Medical Research at the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences. In 2017, he organized the 5th World Conference on Research Integrity in Amsterdam, and he is currently the chair of the World Conferences on Research Integrity Foundation. Prof. Bouter is the author or co-author of 761 scholarly publications in the Web of Science, which has been cited more than 85,000 times, leading to an H-index of 137. He has supervised 78 and is currently supervising 6 PhD students, 17 of whom have been appointed professor to date. So he's currently involved in teaching and research in relation to responsible research practices, and we are very privileged for his willingness to share his insights and expertise with us today. Prof. Bouter, you are more than welcome to share your screen with us and start your talk. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you a lot, Clarissa. After such a nice introduction, I can only disappoint you today. So I'm in advance sorry for that. What I want to do today is to talk about fraud.
Professor,
yes?
Excuse me. I think you are muted for some reason.
No, I can hear him well, Clarissa.
I can hear him well.
I can hear him
Okay,
well as
thank
well.
you.
Yeah.
So there's something wrong with your mic or reception, maybe, Clarissa. It's going better now?
It's better now. That was my issue. Apologies for that, colleagues.
Not a problem at all. I just start again. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to talk to you. My topic today is fraud, fake papers, and retraction. And with that title, I focus on the negative aspects of the academic endeavor. But please bear in mind that I know from direct experience like you do that the large majority of scholars, they want to do the right thing. They don't go into academia to become a fraud or to write fake papers and to be retracted. But yes, these things happen and we need to handle them as well as we can. On the menu of today, I've written it down a little bit in clinical terminology. I first will talk about the diagnosis of the issues, of the fatally flawed, the fraudulent, and the fake papers. I will then look at the therapy, which is surgical. It's a retraction is the solution to these things, and it should happen quick and decisive, and that's not happening currently all the time. In fact, hardly ever. And then we move on to the prevention possibilities, because like in medical domains, prevention is always better. And I will try to point out what that transparency and a focus on a reliable process of doing research that might solve the issue in the domain of prevention. And finally, I will allude to possibilities for research institutes like your beautiful university, like journals, and also like funding agencies, possibilities they have to diagnose, to treat, and to prevent, first and foremost, these awful phenomena. And as Clarissa already told you, I really appreciate it to be interrupted, to be contradicted, whatever. Let's together try to make it a lively event. And for that, I need you to ask questions, to make remarks, to make suggestions. The risk I take is that I won't reach the end of the slide deck before the end of time. That's not a big problem. You will get the slides, and I know what is in them anyway. So without further ado, let's get started and have a look at the diagnosis. The diagnosis is, and these are the first three items, is usually made by surveys in which scholars self-report these phenomena. The typical thing is that a question is asked to a scholar, did you ever in the last 3 years commit fabrication, that is making up data? And when that is asked, typically 2 to 4% say yes, which is in itself quite alarming because it won't be an overestimation, although all these surveys, we have now 45 of them, about 45 of them worldwide that have been conducted. In all these surveys, we protect the identity as good as we can, and we check whether participants believe it. But still, admitting to yourself that you are a fraud isn't easy, so it might be an under-reporting still. And please reflect on that. When this is true, and you have a department of 50 people, in the department, one of them will be a fraud. Well, your department is, of course, a wonderful department. There will be two in the neighborhood department. It's an average, of course, but still, it's quite alarming. Self-reported surveys come to the same range of prevalence for falsification. That is removing data, tweaking around with them, making weird selections, and everything without good justification. And then we have the domain, which you all know about, I'm sure, of questionable research practices. These are the minor evils of academia and doing research. But because they're so prevalent, more than 50% on the aggregate level, they might do a lot of damage to research. Now, these are figures you probably already heard before several times. And they're figures, they're answers to the wrong question in a way, because what we need to know for today is what is the proportion of the papers, the published articles, that is corrupted to a level that it shouldn't be there. It should be retracted. And for that, we have no good estimates. Let me start there. But what we do have are the following three estimates. Recently, a wonderful scoping review was published studying 177 replication studies. And a replication study, as you know, as you without doubt know, is that you repeat a former piece of research as good as you can in exactly the same way. And then your question is, will we get the same answer? Now that happens in a little bit more than half of the occasions, which is alarming in a way as well. And let me be clear, I'm not suggesting that the other half is fraudulent, not at all. There are many reasons why a replication will not be successful. But yes, research misconduct is of course one of them. But in itself, it's already alarming that half of the papers published cannot be reproduced when you try again. And that's the reason I often say when I'm teach, don't believe a study, never believe a study which has not been replicated at least once. Many people are working on fighting this, what we now call the replication crisis. And the latest news is that when you do your utmost best, you can increase the level of replication success to close to 90%. So yes, we can do better. And yes, that takes a lot of effort to do better. And the type of efforts it takes, that I will try to do to a little bit more in depth further down my presentation. Most of you might have heard about a lady called Elizabeth Bick. She has an eagle eye for pictures in scientific articles, for photographs. And her estimate is, and it's a really good guesstimate, because she has looked at tens of thousands of articles in a systematic way, that when there is a photo in that article depicting data, 4% of these photos are manipulated to a level that it shouldn't be there. It should be retracted. And as you may know, Elizabeth has a lot of difficulties in getting these papers retracted. But it's improving over time, and more and more and more papers are retracted. And I will say a little bit more when I show the next slides on that. Finally, still diagnosis. A guy called Ivan Oransky, he started the Retraction Watch blog. Most of you will have seen, and his guesstimate is that 2%, more than 2% of the articles published currently today do meet the COPE retraction criteria. And the COPE retraction criteria are consensus criteria. This sound quite fair. They're not too strict. So that means that 1 in 50 papers, according to Ivan, should never have been published in the first instance and should be retracted as fast as possible. And there's a long way to go, because currently between 1/10 or maybe 2/10 of a percentage points of the papers published are retracted. So there is a lot of reason to believe that we should, and I will argue that we can do better. Now, finally, the problem you may be aware of as well is the problem of fake publications. And these fake publications can be produced by individuals, but nowadays they're mainly produced by paper mills, which are large criminal organizations that sell authorships on papers that are fake, that are fraudulent. They can be fabricated from scratch. It can be done by poorly paid humans or by software. ChatGPT is doing wonderful things nowadays to these paper mills, you can imagine. It can be collated from pieces from other publications, genuine publications. We call that plagiarism. Can be done by humans and software as well, with also some reformulation to escape detection if you can. And then they sell authorship, which are then of course fake authors. And the riddle is, when I tell this to my friends, why do people want to become an author on an article when they have not written it? How come? And the answer is, of course, that it's so important to collect a lot of authorships in your career when you want to stay in academia, when you want to get grants, and so on and so forth. So we've made being an author so dominantly important that it's worthwhile to cheat and cut corners by buying authorships. It happens in many countries. I will show some figures, preliminary figures, and in some countries much more than in other countries. Now, what we see now as well is that fake reviewers can submit fake review reports. You know the habit, of course, that when you submit a manuscript to a journal, you are often asked to list some potential reviewers as well. And if you do, it's quite easy to add an email address which you made yourself for that famous author you're suggesting, and that enables you, or in fact the paper mill, to write your own re-review report, which is usually quite positive. And then the other game is the game of the, I'm sorry, I have to go back again. The game of the special issues. They usually have guest editors, and when you succeed as paper mill to plug a guest editor and to pay for a guest special issue, which is an important source of income for many journals, then you have the possibility to forget about peer review and to fake much more and to accept thousands of paper in special issues, and that in fact happened in the past and is probably still happening. And then of course fake journals, we call them predatory open access journals. They're interesting as well because they don't do peer review at all or do it poorly, and that makes it easy for paper mills to get their paper in. So this is a real issue, and the difficulty is that's still on the rise. Here you see how a paper mill works. You use fraudulent or fabricated data. You have ChatGPT or a similar generative AI program writing the paper. It goes easy. Last Friday I saw this demonstration by an expert. He wrote on the screen live beautiful scientific papers within 10 minutes, and it had a faked data set that looked convincing. So it can be done easily. Now, often it's submitted to many journals and retracted from that. They retract that submission immediately when one journal shows an interest in it. It's nice when you have such a guest editor, as I alluded to. You can do the fake peer review, like I explained. Here are the poor academics. They have a strong pressure to publish, so they can yield to the temptation, and some of them do when the pressure is too high. They buy an authorship which is for sale. You pay a little bit more when it's in a high impact journal, and you pay a little bit more when you are first author or last author, whatever you like. And some of these paper mills offer it on a no cure, no pay basis. And this is, of course, awful because it is polluting the public published track records of research. And that is especially awful when these paper mill products, these fake papers, end up in systematic reviews, which are then used to frame policies or to treat patients with. So that is the real problem we are fighting here, and it's really a big beast. It is important. Here you see it's on the rise. This is recent stuff. It was published in Nature a few months ago by Richard van Noorden. And by the way, you will get my slides if you want. And below all the pictures, you see my references. So all the references to articles, books, YouTube videos, websites, what have you, they can be found, plus a few remarks below my slides. And what you see here is this is the number of articles with a strong similarity to being generated by artificial intelligence, generated by paper mills. There's now good software that can detect that. It might not work that good anymore when these programs get better, but it's functioning quite well, it was told. And what you see here is that you look at the current time, we are nearing 2% of published papers show clear evidence of being a paper mill product, and in medicine and biology it's even more, and on average it's about 2%. So here you pick your favorite disciplinary field, and you can see that none of these fields are free from paper mill products.
Prof. Bouter?
Yes.
Can you hear me? We have
Sure.
a question from Dr. Basson in the chat. She asks, do we have any indication of how often these fake papers are included in systematic reviews or are cited?
No, the issue is, the real answer is we have not, I believe. I'm not aware of that research. What we now do know, and that's quite worrying, is that many systematic reviews, and they looked rather carefully at that in the Cochrane reviews, they did include retracted papers. So that's further down the line. A paper mill product can be recognized or not, and when it's recognized, it should be retracted, which will take time, of course, and sometimes a lot of time, which is unacceptable. But once a paper is retracted, you can still find it in systematic reviews. Many systematic reviews we know now are polluted by retracted papers, and organizations like the Campbell collaboration and the Cochrane collaboration are currently trying to clean up the mess and to check systematic reviews, preferably before an update is published, but also the reviews still already out there, to clean them from these products. And it has been shown already several times that when you do so, the point estimate of the pooled meta-analysis, for instance, changes substantially, which might mean that the conclusion of the systematic review might change from cleaning it up as well. So this is important because and it's the most important pollution in the literature that give you false leads, which are especially awful when they end up in a review or in a clinical guideline or in a policy, environmental policy, social policy, whatever. But it's awful when you lead your colleague scholars astray as well, who might be following your false leads in their research, and then end up a completely unpromising track. I hope this answers the questions a little bit.
Yes, Professor. Dr. Passon says thank you very much for addressing a question, but we have a follow-up question from Prof. Zemlin, who asks, if you publish and then find out that one of your references has been retracted, what should be done?
Well, it's better to do it before you publish, of course, and it can be done easily nowadays because the organization called Crossref, you know them from the logo on PDFs most likely, they have the Retraction Watch database inside in the machinery, and it's the gold standard for retractions. So, and there's other software, Zotero, the reference manager can do it, and a few more reference managers can do it. You need to check it before you submit your manuscript, of course, yourself. You can now easily do it, whether you have a retracted paper in. And as a check, also the editorial office needs to do that before you publish your paper. And increasingly publishers are doing that, although it's still far from perfect. And if this all goes wrong, what you can do is write to the editor and say, I want to correct my paper because unintentionally I included a retracted paper and I want to repair the record, which is an honorable thing to do. It's you admit that you've made a mistake and you are repairing that mistake. And usually editors allow you to have that correction connected to your paper.
Thank you, Professor. I think that answers Prof. Semlin's question of what happens if the retraction happens after the publication. I think you've answered that in saying then contact the journal editor. We have a comment from Zen Folks which says that it should be the journal's problem, not the author's.
Well, that's a good point, and I agree. And you can go one step further as well. In fact, when I talk to editors and publishers about this, I say it's your duty to be monitoring retracted papers and go back to all the papers you ever published and check and recheck their reference list. And if there is a retracted paper in there, you need to repair that, or at least to flag that as well, and inform the original author team, and also show it to all the readers of your thing. It sounds like an awful big job, but it can be automated easily, I believe. But that's future. I'm not aware of any publisher doing this already, but I believe it should be done. Like the person asking this question seemed to be of the same opinion.
Thank you, Professor. That covers all the questions for now.
Well, wonderful. I really like this. So please go on interrupting me. Meanwhile, I try to go to the next slide, and that is this one. This happened a few weeks ago. We have now a new phenomena. I have no clue how large it is and how important it will become, and that's the phenomenon of review mills. It has been shown at MDPI. I'm not aware it has been ever checked for other publishers, so we should be careful for MDPI here. It was discovered and described in the blog, again reference below the slide, that that person found 85 similar review reports concerning 9 reviewers and 23 journals. They came from 5 universities. And what these people did is they requested to add a reference. And then you have to be wary all the time, because these references were references to authors out of this group of 9. Sometimes it was their own article, sometimes it was an article by another reviewer. So this is a nice way to boost your citation score. Having said that, it can of course be the case that one of the reference missed in the manuscript is yours, and it is important from the manuscript. So when you get a suggestion as editor and as author to add another reference, you should always be critical, but you should allow that it might be a good suggestion. But in this instance, it was a poor suggestion, and it was seemingly only an attempt to get a boost of the citation scores of these people. And in that way, it's similar to the citation cartels we knew already, scholars agreeing together collectively to always refer to many of their own papers, the people in the circle, I mean, people of others in the circle, and boost the citation score of everyone in the circle. It's quite effective. But this is a variation on that. It's now on the level of reviews, and these reviews showed evidence of being really poor reviews of the papers. There was a lot of plagiarism and self-plagiarism among the reviews, and there was also evidence that ChatGPT was used. So maybe now there is a way to sell more citations in your profile to people by doing review mill work. I'm not sure, but this is the first indication I saw, and I saw that the possibility of having fake peer review reports is quite alarming as well, and that's the reason I'm mentioning it today. But it needs to be investigated more in depth, of course. Now,
Professor?
this you knew. Yes, sure.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
My microphone went off again. Dr. Bouter asks, don't you think that journals using anonymous review processes add to this problem?
Well, that they might and they might not. It's depending on how good their quality review is. When first the issue popped up that paper mills would suggest big shots in the field as potential reviewer and made a fake email address for these people feeding back to the paper mill, then the serious publishers, they all started departments checking all the references, and some publishers stopped asking for reviewers. Not many editors and not many publishers currently really carefully have a systematic judge of the quality of the peer review report, and it should be, because everything on this slide is easily visible on the peer review report in issue. When you see it, you know this is wrong. It's completely wrong. So editorial office need to do these checks, and they can do them for open peer reviewers with identity known, and they can do them without identity known. Now, having said that, personally, I believe there are advantages of open peer review, including open identities and publishing the peer review report, because there is some evidence that shows that this is better for the quality of peer review, and it's more risky to cheat when your name is below the review report, of course, as well. But having said that, just this morning, two of my great scholarly friends published a beautiful scoping review on that we need more research on peer review, on open peer review, because their conclusion was that we know some things, but not at all the important questions are answered. So if any of you are interested in this field, please consider studying open peer review. There is a lot of open questions out there. Predatory open access. That is an outlet used by paper mills as well, especially on the cheap side of the product, if I may say so, because when you use a predatory open access journal, it might not yield many references, and that's usually what people want. But these journals, they offer poor value for money. That's basically the thing. They accept almost all submissions. They do aggressive marketing, and they're not always easily to recognize because they sometimes also mimic a website of a regular established journal. So, and it's changing all the time, the playing field. The directory of open access journals is trying to identify the real open access journals, and is not including the fake ones, but it's not an easy task. Jeffrey Beal, you may have heard about him, the librarian from one of the US universities, but he's now retired and he stopped his adventure. There's a paywall thing called Cabals. It's quite good, I believe, but you won't have access to it. Not all scholars have. And there is this predatory report list, and that's quite new initiative. It seems quite functioning quite well, but I'm not sure whether anyone investigated that independently already. So be careful there as well. And there is a nice Dutch initiative. It's kind of TripAdvisor, where you, the people submitting the manuscripts, can rate an open access journal basically on whether they offer value for money. And that might become a good guide as well. There's not that much in it yet, but it might be an important one in the future.
Professor, we
Yes.
have a question from one of the journal editors. Professor Whitelaw asks, says, as an editor, one of the biggest challenges is finding peer reviewers, and it's very easy to focus on just getting a reviewer as opposed to focusing on the quality of the review. How much does this contribute to the problem?
It's a fair point to make. It's a fair point to make, and I've heard it before, and I believe it's true, sadly true. The issue is, of course, that peer review, being a peer reviewer, is a volunteer job. And there is nothing wrong with volunteer job, but you want to get some recognition for it. And currently in academia, we don't give career points for being a peer reviewer, which is weird because it's one of the most important tasks we have in academia. We should do it right. We should help our students to become a great peer reviewer. We should give them guidance and courses and whatever in it, but we don't do that as much because it doesn't bring you anything in terms of career and your next grant. So basically it boils down again to reform of the assessment system of people in academia. And I'm sure then when it's clear that you can get your career points for being a good peer reviewer, it won't be difficult anymore to get peer reviewers for your paper. Everyone would love to do peer reviews, but then of course they need to be findable. I love the few journals that give a DOI to every review report and publish it, so it can be easily findable and you can add it to your CV, and when your organization then credits you for it when you are up to a professorship or a permanent position or the next grant or whatever, then it would improve. But yes, currently I've been told that some journals they have to invite 20 people to get 3 reviewers of a paper, which is ridiculous, of course. Most of you will have heard about the organization Committee of Publication Ethics, I guess. They are a service organization for publishers and editors. They have wonderful guidelines and charts and whatever, and they try to help to promote publication ethics as good as they can. They have decent retraction guidelines. They recently decided to support this wonderful initiative, United to Act. Look it up on the web. This is an international collaboration of different stakeholders fighting paper mills, and I hope that from what I've said before, you will agree that this fight is needed. And what you see here is interesting as well. The STM, which is an organization of publishers. It's a kind of lobby organization for publishers. They collaborate in STM, and together they've started what they call the Integrity Hub, which is a growing dynamic set of software with the joint purpose to unmask stuff in manuscripts and papers about to be published, which you don't want and which should be retracted, but prevention is better. So papers, manuscript that should never be published. And it's really exciting what's happening there. My objection is that they refuse to do it open access, but they do have a point, of course, because the paper mills can profit from it as well when it is open access, and then they can try to cheat the system again. But it's not usable for a normal scholar, and it should be wonderful if it would be open and usable for everyone. But they're doing great work there. And by the way, in the next World Conference in Athens, there will be presentations by all these organizations on their progress in the fight against paper mills and similar phenomena. So this is on the upbeat. People are taking care and people are trying to solve the issue. And this is what should happen. Retract the paper when it's not good enough, fatally flawed, I can say as well. And the drama is that this is recognizable. I can read this, you can read this, but usually you miss the phenomena of retraction because the metadata are awful and inconsistent, and it's you need to be an expert librarian to identify retractions in the bibliometrical databases. And it's not weird that people are still citing and putting retracted paper in reference lists, because how do we work? We have a pile of photocopies on our desk, and from that we make the references, or we have the PDFs, slightly more modern, in our iPad and make the reference from that, or we have a card box type of reference database and we use that for the references. Or even worse, we copy paste from other articles our references, which I can not recommend, and you will understand that. But that happens. So making the published literature clean from reference to retracted papers, like one of the kind question posers put on the table, that still needs to be done also in the future, and we need to work hard to identify retracted papers better by improving the meta data and using the gold standard, which is still the Retraction Watch database. Now, this is the Retraction Watch. You know about it, of course. And here you see the infamous top 10 worldwide so far. These people have retracted many papers. Well, some of you may not even have 194 papers, but this guy had close to 200 papers retracted. And when you look at this, is, by the way, Ivan Oransky is the guy who started Retraction Watch. Wonderful chap, and he did wonderful things for the field. This is last year's 2022. It was paper he wrote in the series Worldview in Nature, and he says retractions are increasing, but not enough. Retraction is a good thing, but it should be more. Why should it be more? Because there's still many papers out there that should be retracted and aren't. Here you see how it's growing. This graph goes to 2018. I will show you later on that the number currently is double, about double. So about 1% of the papers in this graph are retracted. It's currently about 2/10 of a percentage point that is retracted. And Ivan believed, like I alluded to before, that it should be more than 2%. So we need to grow this with 10 or 20-fold change. And then we are removing the pollution from the literature well. That's the idea. And this, by the way, is the logo you may have seen on your PDFs of scholarly articles, but never understood what it is. It's a wonderful thing. Please click on it once, and then you see whether the paper you're looking at in a PDF has been updated, including whether it has been retracted. So this is an easy way to check yourself from a PDF of a paper. I didn't know that until half a year ago, about half a year ago myself. So don't feel bad that you don't know that, but this is a wonderful device, and it was communicated not so good. So many scholars don't know this. Here you see that last year, this is more actual, we hit the boundary of 10,000 retractions. And this is getting about 0.2 of a percent point. And here you see that in 2022, there were many of these conference papers, and these are, of course, contained in these special issues I alluded to before. It happens all the time, but the majority is not in the special issue, which is retracted. So it's growing, and many people think is that the growth is due largely to the phenomenon of the paper mills I've been discussing with you earlier on. So that is a difficulty we have to be careful about. So this is what's happening, and what I learned from my physicist friends is you should not look at the level where something is, but at the level by which it is rising over time. And especially when you look at that, this is alarming. We are facing a big problem here, which deserves more priority than we give it currently. And the real solution might be, like I alluded to already before, killing the business model of the paper mills. When we make being an author and publishing less important, in the sense that we dilute it with other phenomena which are equally or even more important, maybe, like being a good supervisor and like being a good peer reviewer and being a great teacher, killing that business model, that might be the only thing that will work, because these criminal organizations, the paper mills, are highly efficient, very profitable, and they have customers all over the place. Here you see another graph of the retraction, the rise in retraction rates. It sends a similar message. It's around 2 points of a percentage. And here you see the countries where the most retractions are hitting. This is the worldwide median. There are no countries without retraction. So, well, it's nice that South Africa is not on this list, but it will be below the list. It should be somewhere nearer to the median than the countries listed here. But it's all acceptable, and yes, it's happening in some countries more than in other countries. And these, as you can see, are countries where also the possibility to be an academic scholars are even more difficult than you face them in your country and I am facing them in my country. So let's not blame the victim, let's blame the system and the perverse incentives. But it's true that even in all these countries, the large majorities of scholars is doing the right thing. Let's never forget that. But still, this is bleak and awful and should be repaired by us.
Professor?
Yes.
We've got some more questions for you. So Professor Pretorius says, I wonder to what extent the increase in retractions can be attributed to ethical behavior as opposed to a fear of being found out given the increased vigilance.
Well, that's an interesting question, but we should realize that most retractions are due to unpaid people, like, where are they? Like these people. We are running academic publishing in weird ways. We have volunteers doing the real work, namely doing the peer reviews, and we have volunteers like the people on this screen and many more who are the volunteer detectives. These are the people who find the difficulties. And Elizabeth Dick, for instance, I mentioned her before. I believe she's responsible as a single person for close to 20,000 retractions herself already. Or let me say it better, papers that should be retracted, but so far a small minority has been retracted. So the publication industry is using us, academic scholars, to do the real work, to be the detectives and to be the reviewers. And then also they're not acting upon our signals that there is a piece of work out there being published that shouldn't be, and it might take for years and it might never happen. So yes, it might be a matter of increased vigilance, but it's still a factor 10 or 20 too low, the level of retractions. And that is the reason that we need to step up the things, and especially the publication industry. They should do better in the sense of being delivering on their core asset, namely quality assurance. That they don't pollute paper anymore, they don't use trees anymore, they have software programs that do the makeup in a tenth of a second. The real thing they are selling us for a lot of money and profit margins of 25% on the average is quality assurance, and they should do a better job there. So it is increasing because we are more vigilant. It's not increasing, I believe, because academia is going down the drain and we're doing collectively more fraud. No, I believe it's a good thing. Like Ivan Oransky, the more rejections we have, the better. Until we are in the range of the maybe 2-3% that people guesstimate that should be there. I hope this answers the question again a little bit. Now let me move on to the complaint I just framed, and I really mean it, with how the publishing industry is functioning in this domain. They're doing wonderful things, and they're trying, and there are wonderful people working in the publishing industry, and there are great editors out there. But the truth is that when it's quite clear that a paper should be retracted, journals are slow or very slow in responding to that fact. Elizabeth Dick, for instance, she stopped, and many of these other detectives, she just stopped writing to editors. She only publishes the stuff on PubPeer, which is an open post-peer review platform. Send a link to the editor. Please do something about it. I'm not going to write you any more letters because usually you don't respond. Journals, they are reluctant to investigate, and the problem is that they have a lot of lawyers and they have real legal problems, of course, as well. And they weirdly demand, not always, but that happens quite often, that authors agree to retraction. Well, this is a little bit like talking to turkeys about the menu for Christmas. Of course, they don't agree to retraction when they have succeeded in publishing a fraudulent paper. So this is really weird, but that's what lawyers often say. You should discriminate, I believe, between looking at the retraction as a sanction of research misconduct. When you frame it that way, yes, you need to prove that there was research misconduct, which is not easy, and which has to be done by universities and other types of employers of scholars. But my view is that you should retract the paper, at the instance, it's clear that it is fatally flawed, no matter what is the cause of the fatal flaw. And you should write a notice to it and say, now listen, we know this is wrong. We have no idea why, but we retract it now because we don't want to pollute the literature anymore. That seems to be the right way to do. There are notices of retraction. I've now had a few PhD students and a postdoc studying these retraction notices. And the conclusion is that they are vague and they're likely mainly written with a view to prevent lawsuits. That is not really informative. That we should standardize that and really do it better and not use words in text fields. Make it good metadata that can be accessible and people can do research with and can find easily. I alluded to this already. Retracted articles are still being cited, and I explained why and what you can do about that. And what is maybe the most awful thing is that we have no good way to award honorable self-retraction. When you discover a big mistake in your work, or when you discover that probably one of your collaborators committed fraud and that polluted the article, you should self-retract it as soon as possible. And that is a good thing. You deserve a medal for it. You deserve credit points for it. And you should not be piled with all the culprits committing research misconduct. We don't have a label and a word for honorable self-retraction, and I believe we really, really, really need it. I've talked about these people already. This is a little bit big again. The picture, the photo detective. This is the papier thing. I assume that you know it, but if not, this is great. This is disruptive innovation. It's a platform where you can post post-publication peer review remarks on articles. You can even do it anonymous, and many people do it anonymous. You can debate whether that is nice. I don't believe so, but I believe that it should be an option to do so. It's moderated quite superficially, and all these remarks are sent to the authors of the articles automatically and to the editors of the journal at issue. And when anyone looking at a paper on the website of that journal is looking, and the provision is that you have added the plugin, the Papier plugin on your web browser, then when you have that, when Papier has an item on that article, it will pop up on the screen once you look at the article. So in fact, Papier is hijacking the websites of the journals at issue, which they don't like, of course, but journals don't publish all their post-publication remarks. They even make you pay for it if they accept it. So as long as that is the case, this is a completely acceptable piece of disruptive innovation, I believe. And it's used quite often by all these people because they just don't have the time and the energy to write to all the editors and publishers anymore. They just post it on Papier when they've found something again.
Professor?
Yes.
Just to note that Zen had some interesting insights that I would like to raise with you. He's just saying it's worth recognizing that journals and publishers vary in how well they are approaching academic integrity issues. Some are doing better than others. And another point raised is honorable retraction is a good point. Retraction is almost the only tool to deal with any problem with a paper. It's a club and we need scalpels.
Well, I fully agree with both of these remarks, and thank you for reminding me that I should not be generalizing too much. Yes, there are wonderful publishers, there are wonderful journals, there are wonderful editors, there are wonderful people being responsible research integrity in some big publishers. Yes, 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 yes. But I emphasized more the downside. It's quite prevalent that they're not having their acts together in the way they should. So there is a huge variation, and which is good, because then the editors and the publishers not doing the right thing, they can learn it from the people who have their act together already. So it's really nice to make this remark. Thank you. Now, what I promised when I accepted the invitation for this meeting is to talk to you about ChatGPT. But let me start with a confession. I am not an expert on that, but I'm interested a lot, and I played around with it, and I've now attended 3 or 4 conferences on what generative AI, because that is the generic term for the type of chatbots ChatGPT is one of, can and cannot do, and what are the downsides and what are the upsides. And this is my summary, but again, I'm not an expert on the whole thing. Like I showed you already, just last Friday, I was demonstrated by an expert that anyone, even I, could write a completely fraudulent scientific article with its own fabricated data set within 10 minutes. Now, it will take me 5 hours most likely, but the experts show me that it can be done in 10 minutes, which is worrying. But the good thing is that it's also a wonderful invention. It can help you find inspiration, search the literature in a way no Google Scholar or other machinery can bring you. It can help you collect your data, to generate code, do your data analysis, do parts of your reporting, and I believe that all can be okay as long as you report it completely transparently. And by that, I mean detailed. So also maybe somewhere in the digital supplement, all the prompts you entered, screenshots, whatever. So it is as replicable as possible, although it never really be replicable. But because the weird thing with programs like ChatGPT is that when you ask exactly the same questions, you will not get exactly the same answer the second and the third time. And there is an explanation for that, but I'm keeping that out for time's sake. It's also very promising, I believe, for editorial offices. They can check data integrity, reporting quality, fraud detection, and they can improve peer review using ChatGPT. But again, they should be open about it. It should be completely transparent and detailedly reported. We should be careful that not biases creep in, which are available in many of these programs, as we know now. But it can be a great tool. And in fact, the Integrity Hub of STM I mentioned before, they are thinking about this already and developing it already. At the downside, it is also a wonderful tool to fabricate and to falsify it and to write fake papers and to do fake peer reviews. And that should, of course, not be done. Now, the problem is currently experts say we can detect this quite well when it happens. But they also say, these experts, it might take a few more months and then it will become virtually impossible to detect because the program is improving so quickly. These programs are improving so quickly. So then we have the frightening situation that there is something we label as being completely wrong. Basically all of us. But it will be difficult to detect, and that is an issue I don't have a real answer for. That's real difficult. And then, of course, we need to be careful, like you alluded to already, whether it is accurate, whether there is bias in the racial bias are and also the gender bias are quite infamous for these type of programs, whether it's relevant and so on and so forth. And the bottom line is, to me, you can use generative AI. You should always report it in detail, completely transparently, but you can never hold it responsible. So it can never be an author. And when something goes wrong, the user is responsible, not the program and not the people who made the program. So you need to adopt the products of generative AI. And when you're do that in a completely transparent way, it's okay. The most experts nowadays advocate that scholars and students should use it as much as they can to learn what this new great tool can do, and also where it goes wrong, because you need to practice that. But again, it's a moving target. I'm currently in a committee revising the Dutch Code of Conduct on Research Integrity, and we will probably decide that this target is moving too quickly to give detailed norms on it. We will say something about it, of course, but it cannot be too detailed. But you cannot codify a moving target. That will be for the next revision. And this is something another scholar has published in a blog, and the reference is below that. It's Sarah Eaton. She says it will be normal in the near future that human AI interaction in writing is the rule, not the exception. And she believes, and she has a good point, I believe, that this will create creativity will be enhanced, not be diminished. It will be wonderful for language bias. You see already how wonderful it is to go from one language to the other in many of these new pieces of software. You should well, you don't need to understand everything. I also don't understand everything what happens within systems I'm using all the time, and this is no exception. But you cannot relinquish responsibility. It will always be there. When you use it, you are responsible, no one else, and you have to face the consequences when it's wrong, and wrong in one of these ways I alluded to. Attribution is important. You should be transparent, and we have some difficulty now with plagiarism. I already had some difficulty with the phenomenon of plagiarism, not of words but of ideas. And with ChatGPT, it's becoming very difficult. That a few months ago I was at a conference where the chair of the European Association of societies, scholarly societies of the countries, was telling us. He said, "Well, let's forget plagiarism," and she says it as well. We are in the domain of post-plagiarism. Anyway, let me try to link this in the final half hour we still left together to research integrity, the topic of your meetings. You know that research integrity is about behavior, individual or collectively. You know that trust and being trustworthy is important, and that transparency is really important to attain that trustworthiness. And you probably also know that open science and accountability go hand in hand in the promotion of trustworthiness. And I believe that all stakeholders, really all stakeholders, need to collaborate in these things, in fighting the downsides of academia. We have been discussing so far. And by all stakeholders, I mean the researchers, the research institutes, the funding agencies, the learned societies, the government, the journals, the publishers, and so on and so forth. And especially the publishers. I've blamed them a little bit too much, possibly, but the message should be clear. They can and they should do better. They sell quality assurance, but they use volunteers to produce that quality assurance, and they are the guardians of the validity and the trustworthiness of the published track records, and they can really do a better job. Although there are exceptions, that point was accepted by me. This is how it all circles around transparency. That is what you need to be able to be trustworthy and to check for validity. Open science, especially open methods and open data, help a lot to get transparency. And of course, also other responsible research practices, they help to fight the wrong things, where we started our lecture today, the fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism, and the questionable research practices, and the replication crisis. So this is the way how, to me, this all hangs together, and why open science, that is the topic I'm opening now, is a great way to improve matters. And when I say open science, I don't mean everything which is under the umbrella of open science. There are many issues, more even than what is on this slide. I focus on open methods and open data only, because these are the most important routes where we can improve matters in terms of validity and trustworthiness. Open methods, you know that by now, most likely concerns registration, or in the social sciences, they call it pre-registration, of essential feature of a study design. And preferably the full study protocol should be available. You can publish it. It can be a preprint. It can be a repository, whatever. Or you can do a registered report, which is superior to these things, according to me. But let me explain that on my next slide. And the essential thing I'd like to emphasize of open methods, we're talking about open methods, is that it is prospective. You declare your methods before you start your data collection in a way that is parked on the cyberspace, which you cannot touch anymore without leaving traces. You can change it later, of course, but that is visible for everyone who goes to that pre-registration. And preferably you make it public, then everyone can access it. If you are afraid that someone is stealing your wonderful ideas, if you have them, you can put an embargo in it. That's not a big deal. And then after the embargo is lifted, everyone can see it. And some embargoes are never lifted. That's also okay. It's still there. And committees investigating allegations of research misconduct can go to the study protocol in which you declare what you set out to do, and can check whether you did it, because you need that to study most of the research forms of research misconduct and also the questionable research practice. You need to have access to what people wanted to do, and that otherwise you can never say whether they did it or not. And then I told you it already, you can also make amendments, which then also are time stamped. I may have shown you this slide before, and if so, I apologize, but this is such a great idea, the registered report. It kills the beast of selective reporting. And by that, I mean that when you go to the literature for any question, there's an overly positive picture sketched in the literature, because we don't like to publish our negative findings. And we also editors and journals and publishers don't like negative findings, because positive findings are cited more often, appreciated more often, and they do more for your career. Killing the selective reporting has proven to be difficult over time. We're trying to do that for 30 or 35 years already, but this is a wonderful solution. Let me tell you briefly how it works. You have a grant, you have a great idea, you write the study protocol, you get a grant for that, you get all the permissions, medical ethics, animal ethics, whatever you need. And then you start not to collect your data, but you start to write your article, which is a bit weird because you don't have data yet, but you cannot write your full article. You can write the first half of your article. You can write the introduction and the method section. And in the method section, you can refer through hyperlinks, for instance, to the full study protocol that is somewhere in that pre-registered cyberspace. And then editors and reviewer have everything they need. In the introduction, they can read whether you're going to do an interesting study. In the methods, they can read whether you're setting out to do it in the best way possible. And if they agree, they should accept your paper. And when they make the decision on the basis of the introduction and the methods, what you get is that there is no distraction by your results and your conclusions, because they aren't there. No one knows them. So that bias goes away. And then when it is accepted after major revision, minor revision, you know how these things go. When it is accepted, you start collecting your data. When that's done, you analyze it, you write a report, you send it in again. And the second check is, only whether you did what you promised when you submitted the first half of your article. And this is the first study showing that it works wonderfully well. These are registered reports, 71 of them, mainly social science, because they're a little bit ahead of the pack. It's happening in biomedicine now as well, but they started. Less than 45% was positive of them. All are published as a report, as a registered report. They selected a double sample of similar standard reports, and I believe they did it well. You have to check the paper to see whether you believe it as well, but it's reasonable what they did. And in that control group, they found that more than 95% of the papers was positive. And this is normal. You see that all over the place. You see that all the time. You see that everywhere. This is due to selective reporting. And now we have proven that it is due to selective reporting, because when you kill the possibilities to do selective reporting, like the registered report, it doesn't happen anymore. So this is much better than that. I believe it's in the phase of early adoption. It's a little bit more than 300 journals out of, what is it, 35,000 scholarly journals. So that's not really enough yet. But now it seems to be growing because funding agencies are picking it up. And that is a great idea, because when your funding agency says, hey, listen, we like what you set out to promise to do. We want to grant your study. Wow, wonderful. But we have one condition. The condition is you file and have accepted a registered report first. And the good news is that we will pay you for, let's say, half a year to prepare that registered report and get it published. And only when you are successful, then we will get you the rest of your grant. And that will even better kill selective reporting, because then you have to promise it to get your grant. It's really wonderful. And there is a bonus, because when you do the registered report, these are all indicators of methodological quality. The registered report compared to this is another study, to another comparable sample, they're superior. In the methodological sense, all superior. And I like that, especially being a methodologist, because my whole career I've been writing peer review reports that were usually quite critical on the methods of a study. And only now I realized that this was stupid. These studies had been done already. But the good news with registered reports is that now you can do a peer review and have still some impact on the study, because they can still change the study design, make it an amendment, add it to the pre-registration, and then set out to do the data collection. And that's probably the explanation that registered reports are better studies, which is shown in this study. Wonderful, really, I can recommend it. I'm going to skip this a little bit because we all know about open data. We likely all know as well that it's difficult, very difficult to do open data, but it's important. It's about making them findable, accessible, interoperative, reusable, and putting them in a good repository with good metadata to make that happen. And then, of course, you have the GDPR type of stuff, the privacy stuff. So it should be anonymized or pseudonymized or whatever to be legal to do so. There are methods for that, but they're time consuming, and increasingly funders are realizing that and giving you money to spend time on being great in the domain of fair data. There's a lot of literature about it. There are a lot of great courses. It's never easy, but it's improving. And that's the good news. The funders are the driving force. When funders say you can get your grants on the condition that you do fair open data, then all of us do fair open data. We might not like it, but we like the money, so we all do it. So this type of force can work well. And it can also work for registered reports, I believe. This is what we do in biomedicine. I'm not sure where you are all coming from, but in biomedicine, we have learned that we should write articles in a way people can understand. And we have a whole industry of making reporting guidelines for that. We have now more than 610. Many of them are also usable in other domains of research. And it's really good, because when you have an unclearly written paper, you have no clue whether it's done right, and you have no clue what exactly to do when you want to use the results of the paper. So this is a necessary condition, good reporting for the other things. Yeah, good reporting can also be about a lousy paper, of course, but then at least you can understand that it's a lousy paper. I said it already, I believe replication is important, and it is undervalued. Scholars often don't like it, say, well, this for the people without any new ideas, they can do replication. Funding agencies hardly ever fund it because they overrate novelty as well. Journals don't like it. They don't like papers on what has been published already in the past, and so on and so forth. And we really need to change that. Yeah. John Ioannidis, you may have heard about him. He's a kind of guru in the methodological domain. He explained in this Nature paper why replication has more scientific value than original discovery. And he's right. And this is my own humble echo. I say here, together with my colleague Gerben Tarit, that empirical research must be replicated before you can trust the findings. And the last few years, I'm discovering and advocating that even in the humanities, replication is important. They had never heard about the phenomenon there, and we're now testing it out in a few interesting studies. And there's still a long way to convince people in the humanities that they need to do replication as well, but I believe they have. When you're interested in scientific philosophy, Karl Popper explained it already in this citation. I'm not going to read it. It is completely made clear why replication and reproduction is so important. I skip this one and then come to that one, which is one of my last slides I want to talk to you. And that is something I learned from Marcus Manefo, the guy who started the reproducibility networks in Europe quite successfully. He explained, and it's again a beautiful Nature paper, Nature, maybe Nature Communications, I'm not sure. The reference will be below the slide. He explains that we should shift the focus a little bit from quality and reproducibility concerns regarding the outcome, regarding the process. And he uses an analogy with the automobile industry. The story goes as follows in this article. He says, well, listen, in the US, we were world champion automobile manufacturing, but then the Japanese came along and they have beaten us quickly and convincingly. And they did that by not making an automobile and then checking whether it worked and throwing away where it didn't. No, they did that by focusing on the process and having excellent quality assurance on every single step of the process. And they, at the end of the production process, all the automobile works there. There are no failures anymore because they focus on the process more. And he advocates that we should do that in academia as well. We can organize in institutions and departments internal audits. I know institutions where nothing can leave the premises before going through internal audits, which is great. The last decade, maybe, I have asked my PhD students always to find a buddy. And that buddy reanalyzes all the data of that PhD student independently. And the reciprocal service is that my PhD student does the same for that buddy. And then they both have a peer check to what they're doing, because it's so easy to make mistakes in data analysis. People make them all the time. And this helps a little bit in prevention, detecting them before they go out in your paper. We need to be open. about our mistakes. We do blame-free reporting is important. You should not punish a person who says, I've made a mistake. No, you should help that person to prevent it in the future. That is important. We need better methodological and statistical training for most researchers still, I believe, although over the last decades, great improvements have been made there. And we also need expert guidance, because you cannot know it all. When you use a really weird statistical trick in your study, when you do a systematic review, find an expert to help you in the search strategy, find a statistician to help you in the analysis and to understand that. You have to have standard operating procedures in the quality handbook for early career researchers. You need methodological review boards before studies go out, and you may have in big consortia even a red team, a team of experts with only one assignment, try to find the holes in what is happening in the main consortium. And all these things might help to improve over time, and this slide has the same message. In Europe, we're now lucky. We have a lot of money in the European Union in research ethics, research integrity, and research producibility. These are two of the wonderful the consortia focusing on reproducibility nowadays, but there are 20 more, and you can find the websites easily. In the Netherlands, we were, I believe, worldwide the first to have a separate program for replication studies, because you cannot get a grant in a regular research programs at the moment. That needs to change, but that's the case. It was a small amount of money. We did 24 projects, but it was great. We learned a lot. And now, and I, by the way, conflict of interest declaration, I had the privilege to chair this committee, and I'm also the chair of the new Open Science initiative in the Netherlands. It's really wonderful. Our current Minister of Education and Research, he designated for 10 years, for each year, 20 million euros to promote open science, like open data and open methods I just alluded to, but also citizen science and a lot of other, and open software, for instance, and many other initiatives, which is great. So some parts of the world are lucky. The European countries are lucky now, but it's happening in Asia, and I believe that in South Africa it could happen as well. The National Science Foundation and the Medical Research Council you have are quite aware of these problems, and I hope that someone from them is listening and take the courage to copy these wonderful initiatives. Early career researchers, they are the driving force. They convene in reproducibility networks and open science communities. They have reproducibility meetings. Promote them, help them, make it happen. These are the driving forces of change in academia. I'm skipping the story about the assessment and getting good career points for all the stuff. And I go to the end and say that when you want to know more about these things, you should come to the World Conferences on Research Integrity, on site or online. The next one is in Athens, and all the topics I have been having slides on during this brief presentation, even the slides I haven't showed you because you were so kind to ask some nice questions. All these topics like ChatGPT and paper mills and what have you, and open research and open methods will be there in the form of a workshop, a symposium, a plenary session, or many abstracts. So please grab the opportunity to attend in essence or online as a virtual participant. And with that, I want to stop my sharing and I'm open to your last questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. I'm actually just checking for the last question here. There's no new questions posted, but the last questions we have is from Dr. Sadie van Gijssen. But where would you, this is about the registered reports.
Your sound is falling away again.
Okay, I
That's
hope
better.
you can hear me now. Okay,
Sure.
where would you submit the registered report? A journal, because that would entail choosing one journal for all the publications flowing from the study, which might not be appropriate later down the line.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Some grants will be reported in multiple articles, and then you should cut slices, I believe, of the attendant articles for later on. And when you do that in a good way, you can of course send multiple registered reports to multiple different journals from one project. And funders who now force you to have a registered report accepted, it's still in the early experimentation phase. I'm not completely sure how they handle this. They might say you need to have on your main findings registered reports accepted. They may say all your intended publications should become registered reports, which is quite difficult, of course. I guess that in the early stage, they will go for having 1 or 2 registered reports accepted before you get the rest of your grants. And when you're on your own, you can just do what you want. So you can decide whether you want everything in the registered reports and you can work overtime, or you take only the main results from your study.
Thank you, Professor. I don't see any hands raised or any other questions. So I think with 4 minutes to go, Prof, may I finish the session then?
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
I'm
let's go.
completely in your hands. You're the chair.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for always being so willing to share your expertise and wisdom with us. The talk was very insightful, especially with the practical advice and wisdom you gave us in what we as researchers can do to counteract the phenomenon of research fraud. And some of the highlights that that at least I made notes of is that we need to help and mentor our students to become better or great peer reviewers. We need to check regularly whether the papers we are citing may have been retracted, preferably before publication, and that if we do discover that a retracted or fraudulent paper has been cited in our research after publication, that we please reach out to the editor and publisher for the assistance to remove it. And that and a reminder that there are some useful ways to use generative AI, but that in those cases we report it transparently, but also that it's not okay to use the tool to fabricate, falsify data that contributes to this increasing culture we have of this rising research fraud. So I would also like to thank our organizing team within the DRD for their planning and support for this event. And of course, a special thank you to all of you, our audience and research community, for your engagement and your passion for ethical and responsible research. We hope that you will join us for the next session on Wednesday, the 14th, when we speak about the Stellenbosch University structures that are there to support you in conducting responsible and ethical research. And also, as Prof mentioned, we hope to see you at the World Conference on Research Integrity taking place from 2nd to 5 June in Athens. We hope to see you there. Thank you very much, Prof.
Well,
We
thank
really
you for
enjoyed
your
the
wonderful
session.
summary. And that's really great.
Thank you, everyone. The slides and the recording will be shared with you afterwards. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you so much. Bye.